Hello, buddy. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be going over 12 of some of the most confusing items in League of Legends. I'm going to break it down in depth, explain how the items work, and some of the optimal situations to use these items. So special thanks to Mitch for donating to support this guide. I really appreciate it. If you would like to support a guide yourself, you can just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com. I'll research it, and I'll create a video just like this covering whatever you want to know about League of Legends. It's just $30 if you're a non-member, $25 if you are a member. I have several of them in queue right now that I'm going to be cranking out over the next week or so, but just email me, let me know what you have in mind. I'll let you know what's possible, what we can work on. And Rory is in here hanging out as well, so she might go in the other room in a little bit so we can finish this video, but for now she's hanging out in here. But be sure to check out the rest of the content on the channel as well if you like this. We have lots of guides, tier lists, coaching sessions. I stream every night starting around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a great time, wonderful community, lots of great information out there, and I try to be as conversational as possible in the comments and during stream as well, answering any questions that you might like to have answered. Okay, sorry, lots of stuff going on here right now, but anyways, let's go ahead and get in here, and be sure to like and subscribe as well if you enjoy the content. We'll let other people know that we have quality stuff on the channel. We're still a relatively small channel, but we're still growing. And you can find access to this Google Doc as well, where I'm going to break down a bunch of the numbers for you. That'll be in the description, and I'll have timestamps as well. So if you don't have time to watch the whole thing, you can always go into the timestamps. I'm going to try to go as fast as I can, but Mitch really wanted 12 items in here, so that means that even to do a 30-minute video, we'd have to go faster than 3 minutes per item. And so we'll see if we can do that. That's going to be really fast. But I'll do it as fast as I can. You could easily make like a 5-hour video about this stuff if you included tons of examples and things like that. But we're going to try to see if we can get it done in an hour or less. Okay, so first up about items, and I'm drawing this on some earlier videos that I've done on items as well, but I know not everyone has watched every single guide on my channel. That would be just about impossible. So I'm just going to hit the highlights here about how to think about itemization, then we'll go into those 12 specific items. So first up, you need to understand that items are dynamic. There are some items that you want to take in some situations and not take in other situations, and so it sometimes might be a good idea to take a less efficient item or an item that might be a little outside of the norm if it makes sense for a certain situation. So a great example of this might be taking something like an Hourglass on Kai'Sa. It's not something you would usually get, but in some situations against maybe a Zed or a Karthus, you could go that on her because it's going to have that Zhonya's effect and because she does have AP ratios. So sometimes going some funky items can make sense in some situations. And you might have to adapt your build, particularly on champions that can go a mix of a bunch of different types of items, like Kai'Sa, who can go AP, AD, or on hit, or some champions that can go for either more offensive builds or more defensive builds. So if you're Lee Sin, for example, you might get a couple of offensive items early, and then you might have to decide, okay, do I want to switch over and start getting defense, or do I want to keep going offense if I'm snowballing? So there's not an exact, 100% formula for what you should get on each champion every single time. So it's important to realize that and to learn and think about the context about why certain items are good in certain situations, right? And that's what I'm hoping to teach you here today. So I'm not going to tell you buy this item always on this champion, but I'm going to hopefully show you how some of these items work and think about situations where they might be good on certain champions. Hey, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it. So that's the number one thing to keep in mind, is that you're going to have to adapt, and it's better to understand how items work and why they're good in certain situations rather than trying to memorize which item you need to get in which order every single time, the U.GG style. Even U.GG now is including where you have these options, right, as your sort of later items, but you really need to understand why they work and not just which ones to get. Okay, another thing to understand is that pro item optimization, so what the pro players are getting, is not always the best for solo queues. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. Particularly in the support role, this is something that can be confusing a lot of times for people, because in pro play, you're going to get a lot less gold overall than you will in solo queue, because in solo queue, people are going to be dying a lot. I mean, the final score might be 50 to 50, in a silver game, but in a pro game, the final score might be something like 15 to 15. And so there's just a lot more gold floating around, which means items that stack multiplicatively that scale better are going to be better in that type of environment, right, where the score is 50 to 50. Whereas items with really high base value but perhaps less scaling are going to be more valuable in general. The same is true of champions. That's why you see things like tanks, for example, really popular in pro play, because they have a lot of base stats. They just have a lot of health, a lot of armor, a lot of magic resist. And that's like free gold. That's free stats that they just get just for existing in the game versus an enchanter, right? So when you pick Braum over Sona in pro play, you're probably getting thousands of gold worth of just raw stats off of that champion, regardless of the items that you get. And this is important because a lot of times in pro play, supports aren't going to be able to get a lot of items. You know, they're going to get their 4-ward item, they're going to get tier 2 boots, a ton of control wards, and maybe they finish off one item, right? Whereas in solo queue on Sona, you can probably regularly, if you're in silver and, you know, a 50 to 50 score game, you can probably get 3 or 4 completed items. So the scaling is going to work much better. Another example of this in terms of itemization is Ashe and whether or not you should get Blade the Ruined King or Infinity Edge. Most people just blindly get Blade the Ruined King because they see that's what all the pros are doing. But you have to keep in mind in pro play, Blade the Ruined King is going to be much better for team fights because you're going to combine it with Runaan's Hurricane. So when you get Runaan's Hurricane and you're having 5v5 team fights, each one of those bolts off a Hurricane is going to trigger Blade the Ruined King. So you're going to get a ton of value off of that item because of the way that it interacts with Hurricane. So you're going to have a really powerful 2-item spike. Versus in solo queue, if you're not doing these team fights, if it's just skirmishing, Crown Fiesta, everybody's running around trying to 1v1 or 1v9, then you're not going to get the full value out of Runaan's Hurricane because you're just going to be fighting 1, maybe 2 people. You're not going to be able to proc all 3 of those bolts. So something like Infinity Edge is going to be a lot stronger against single targets because of the way that crit scalings and the way that that modifier works on Ashe. Check out my Ashe video. I just did a guide on her. Shout out to Megan. She sponsored that probably a few weeks ago. So I go over the math on Infinity Edge plus Blade the Ruined King. But the bottom line is you need to think carefully about, does this make sense in the meta that I'm playing in with, you know, my play style, with the play style of how my teammates are interacting on any given patch in any given elo. Okay, so the pros obviously know what they're doing. They're very smart. They're coached very well. They have analysts that help them out. But so it doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means their situation might be different than your situation based on how people play the game, based on whether they're more reckless and there's just a lot more skirmishing rather than clean, organized 5v5 team fights. That can affect which items are going to be strong. So keep that in mind as well. And then finally, you know, you want to play around your win condition, especially if you're playing something like a support or a tank. You know, if you're playing a support, you know, and your AD carry's not doing very well, maybe you skip Ardent Censer and maybe you get something like Redemption just to help your team out in team fights, or just to add some extra global pressure. If you have a split pusher that's really strong and you're just kind of trying to hold mid, you're doing a 1-3-1 strategy or something, having Redemption can be really helpful because you can just toss that to the side lane to help out in that skirmish, right, where you can't do that with Ardent Censer. So that's just a really simple example of how you might need to change your itemization based on how your team's doing. Or if you're playing one of those champions that could go, you know, damage or could go tank, someone else on your team is already doing really well on the damage side, but you're lacking a tank, maybe you should go tank instead. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay, and so let's go ahead and blaze through this part really quickly. So the bottom line is just be aware of the context, think carefully about how is this item helping my team achieve victory in the style of game that's going on right now. Okay, understanding relative stats. So these are the basic values of stats. I gave you a cheat sheet here. There are other stats in the game, but these are some of the more common stats. And it's really important to understand that you're on a budget. I talk about that down here in a little bit. Yeah, like right here. So you're on a budget. So you want to tab and just look at how much gold that you have in a game. You know, you might only get 10,000 gold in a game, right? If you're a support, maybe you only get 13,000 gold in the game if you're an AD carry. So just look in there and just think, okay, this is my budget. You know, average your last 10 to 20 games and just think, you know, what's the most efficient thing I can get? Because if you can get something that's hyper efficient, then it's almost like you're getting free kills if you think of that. So we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when you buy something like Ardent Censer, it's over 200% gold efficient. It costs 2,300 gold. That means you're getting an extra 2,300 gold worth of value whenever you buy it, which means effectively you're getting like 7 kills. So each kill is going to be worth about 300 gold. You're getting 2,300 gold, so you're getting like 7 kills and change. That's the best way to think of it. You buy that item, you get 7 free kills, if that helps you sort of visualize how powerful some of these items are. So gold efficiency matters a lot, and so you're going to want to familiarize yourself a little bit with how much each stat is worth. Now, once again, this is going to change depending on your champion and your game state. Some champions might have additional scaling with HP, where they're going to get extra value. Some champions might scale extremely well with plus healing and shielding, like a Soraka or a Sona. Some champions might have really high base damages on their abilities, so Magic Pen's going to be particularly useful, like a ZZ'rot or a Brand. So this is how much they're worth in terms of raw gold on their stat sheet how much Riot budgets the item, but you also want to think, can a certain champion abuse certain kinds of stats or items, or like Taric abusing armor, for example. Galio getting extra benefit off of magic resist. So, you want to think carefully, once again, what's the context behind these stats for individual champions, but in general, you want to be aware of the gold value of items so that you can make good, efficient choices. And I'll talk about the efficiency of those 12 items when we get down there in here in just a minute. Finally, you want to think about resistances. So the easiest way to think of it is each 1 point of armor that you have means that it's going to take 1% more damage, physical damage, to kill you. The same is true of magic resist. There's a more complicated formula for that, but that's just the easiest way to think of it. So for example, if you have 1000 HP with no armor, then it takes 1000 physical damage to kill you, right? However, if you have 1000 HP with 100 armor, it's going to take 100% more physical damage to kill you. So effectively, you're going to have 2000 health. It's going to take 2000 physical damage to kill you. Shields and healing scale with resistances. Okay, damage works against it. Shields work with it. So, for example, if Janna shields you for 300 and you have 100 armor, it's going to take 600 physical damage to break that shield. If Nami heals you for 200 and you have 100 armor, it's going to take 400 physical damage to negate that 200 heal. Conversely, if you're ZZ'rot and you try to do 300 damage and the enemy has 100 magic resist, it's going to, you're only going to deal 150 damage. Okay? So, plus healing and shielding then is very loose sort of analogy here, but it's about 4 times as effective as damage is in many situations. And that's why enchanters are so strong in a lot of metas, and that's why they're very difficult to understand. I talk about this all the time in my tier list videos, so watch those if you want more details about enchanters and which enchanters are strong and why on any given patch. But in most patches of League of Legends, in solo queue, enchanters are going to be the highest win rate because of that, because of the way that healing and shielding scales based on resistances. And that's why you have Sona up here at 55, Nami 53, Soraka 53. So this is super common to see these types of champs near the top, okay? So sometimes in a super heavy damage meta where it's like overloaded, like the Dark Harvest meta of the preseason where Dark Harvest just did a ludicrous amount of damage, Ignite was doing a ton of damage, all that stuff, you might see ZZ'rot and Brand pop up there for a few patches, but it almost always normalizes and enchanters come back up just because of how they interact with plus healing and shielding. And then the tanks, oftentimes in solo queue, are going to be 50% or less. There's a couple select ones that are very good against enchanters like Leona. They might be a bit higher, maybe Thresh. But a lot of your peeler tanks, your Braums, your Toms, your Alistars, all that stuff's almost always going to be like 50% or less, just because they have very limited scaling and they require a lot of team coordination. But anyways, that's another thing to keep in mind, just when in terms of evaluating stats, that healing and shielding is super powerful. It's way over budget. So it might only be budgeted for like 35 gold per 1% healing, but because of the way that it interacts with resistances, it's even more powerful than that. Okay. Going through that, understanding game state, we mentioned that. Choose items that complement your strength. And then choose items that have a high value. So we mentioned before. So oftentimes completing an item is more powerful than getting components. So for example, if you complete your Blade of the Ruined King, then you're going to get the really good on-hit passive off of it. And that's a lot better than just having components plus boots and a couple of longswords, which is something else that's not going to be completing the item. League of Legends really wants you to complete your items. Usually there's very powerful effects that only come about whenever you complete the items. And a lot of times completed items have really strong multiplicative stacking with other items. So an easy example of this is Critical Strike. The more critical strike you get, the more likely you are to crit, the more value something like Infinity Edge is going to have, the more value that attack speed is going to have. So that third item that you get on your AD carry oftentimes is going to be even more powerful than your first 2 items, because your first 2 items are helping to power up the third item, whether it's more attack speed or AD or critical strike or whatever it is. Items stack multiplicatively. So 1 + 1 is not equal to 2. 1 + 1 is usually equal to 3. That kind of thing, right? If the sum is much, much greater than the parts most of the time. And so that's why it can feel like you're just getting completely obliterated if you're only on 2 items and the enemy's on 3 items. They just blow you out of the water. You might think, well, it's just one more item, who cares? But it's because of all the stacking that compounds over time. Okay, so that's how League of Legends works. So this is why it's much more powerful to funnel your gold on a specific champions that scaled really well, even if you're not in a formal funnel comp. The AD carry has always been a funnel role, for example, because they scale so well. They're some of the highest scaling champs based on stats because they have so many different ways to scale. They have crit, they have attack speed, they have armor pen, they have AD. A lot of times they have some kind of passive or on-hit interactions. So that's why you don't want to support taking CS or taking gold, because their scaling is going to be a lot lower than 80 carries as the game goes on. That's changed over the years with the plus healing and shielding stat, but it's still relatively similar. Same thing about Master Yi and why he's used in scaling comps, right? In funnel comps, where you have like a Lulu top and a Master Yi jungle. It's because he scales so well. Hey, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it. So certain champions just scale much more powerful than other champions, and you want to feed them as much gold as possible because of the way that all those stats stack up. Okay, let's get in here. So we spent 15 minutes on the preamble, but I think it's important to go through all of that. So we're going to try to go through the items as fast as possible, but keep all of that in mind as we're going through these things. Okay, 12 misunderstood items, and just in no real particular order, here's what we're going through. We're going through Ardent Censer, Athene's Redemption, Blatherin King, Guinsoo's Hurricane, Black Cleaver, Wits End, Death's Dance, Titanic Hydra, ZZ'rot, and Frozen Heart. I should have mentioned those early on, but there will be timestamps in the description. Okay, so let's go through these. All right, so support items are some of the most misunderstood items, partially because people don't understand how powerful plus healing and shielding is, and a lot of times they have lots of conditional effects, like Redemption has to hit people a lot, or you have to deal damage with Athenes in order to get the lifesteal off of Athenes, or Ardent Censer gives like this buff to different people, and it's not like a raw stat, right? Like you have to actually touch people with healing and shielding in order to give them the stats. So there's a lot of variation among support items, like, and its efficiency versus any other item in the game. You know, if you get an Infinity Edge, you know exactly what it does. You can quantify it. It's like, okay, it gives me this much critical strike. I get this much AD. Every time I auto attack, it's going to work the same way, right? I'm going to have the same percentages. I'm going to have the same numbers, right? Versus like Ardent Censer, you don't know, right? Like how many people can you hit with Ardent Censer? How many people are going to like really use that buff and auto attack efficiently? Athene's, how much damage are you going to output, and how frequently can you apply that extra healing? Redemption, how many allies are going to actually stand in the circle when you cast it, and how many allies are going to run out of the circle and not pay attention? So it's very, very conditional. So in that sense, you know, support items in many ways are even more skill dependent than other ones. Not always, but oftentimes. And you have to think more critically about which items you get, because it's not always obvious, right? Should you get Ardent Censer first? Should you get Athene's first? Should you get Redemption? It's not as cut and dry as other roles a lot of times. So I figured I'd start with that. All right, so Ardent Censer. And all of them are super efficient. And the thing about support items in general is support is a very low economy role. It's the lowest economy role. You don't get any CS. And for years and years and years, a lot of people hated playing supports, and support was by far the least played role because you just never got powerful items. It just felt like you weren't making an impact on the game. You were, because you had really good vision, and a lot of times you could peel for key targets like your 80 carries, so you did have a big impact, but it didn't feel like it because you didn't get a lot of items, and a lot of people that didn't think critically about the support role just assumed it was kind of worthless, right? And also for like the first 5 or 6 seasons of League of Legends, it was basically almost exclusively all tanks in most metas because there was no plus healing and shielding stat. And so you really didn't have any stats, you really didn't have any power, you would just get a couple of aura items and like a ton of control wards, and that was basically it. They changed that over time. You know, they had Sightstone, and then they got rid of Sightstone and just worked it into your gold item itself. So they've tried to give you more gold, and they've tried to make the items much, much more efficient. That's why these items are super dangerous if anyone on any other role gets it. Ivern, for example, right? Who's going to get all of these items? Ardent Censer, Athene's Redemption. It's super hard to, you know, play around Ivern. That's why they've had to nerf him a lot to balance out, because you get to cheat the curve. So all of your items are going to be like 2,100 to 2,300 gold. So that makes them super efficient. Because if you get something like, if you get like 5 AP that's going to be worth like 100 gold on an item, then, you know, that's going to be a much larger percent of about 2,000 gold versus if you get a 3,000 gold item and get 5 AP on that, then it's not going to be as valuable because you had to pay more gold to get it, if that makes sense in terms of efficiency. So anyways, these items are very efficient. So Ardent Censer, if we just click on this, look through it really quickly. And I'm using League Wikia. I've got a link for all the items here, but you can just go to the wiki and learn more about stuff too. It's fantastic. It even has like all kinds of little extra notes and strategies and things like that to answer a lot of these really complicated questions that I'm going to go over here. It doesn't get them all, but it gets most of them. If you look at the raw stat value here, even if you don't take into account the the passive here, the heals and shields part, then it's still 2700 efficiency. So it's still going to be 117% efficient without any of its passive effects, right? But at max rank, if you are, healing yourself and other people a ton, then it can go all the way up at maximum level to 389% efficient if you tag everybody, which is insane. That means you're getting almost 3 times or 4 times the gold value. So that would be the equivalent of getting like 6,500 gold, which is equal to like 23 kills or something like that. So if you're a Sona and you're level 18 in a team fight and you give everybody this buff with your W, it's like you're giving your team 23 extra kills. Now that's an extreme example. So what I did for this is I think I just assumed level, like level 9 that you get this. And I just said that it was going to be about 200% efficiency. But it can go much, much higher than that. Even in like relatively simple scenarios. I think I said if you touch 2 people at level 9 for the math there. But it's very simple. Even if on a single ally, if you're around level 11 or so, it'll give you about 200%. If you touch, 3 allies or 4 allies, then it goes up even more than that. So at a simple 200% efficiency, it's still like you're getting 7 free kills worth of gold. So super, super efficient, very good, particularly on auto-attacking champions. So anything that's going to have Hurricane as well, or Guinsoo's, because this is an on-hit effect, on-hit damage. So each one of the Hurricane bolts, we do have Hurricane on the list, we'll talk about it, does apply this extra damage. And Guinsoo's, whenever it does that double shot damage on every other attack, once it's stacked up, that also applies this. So anyone that's going to get Guinsoo's or Hurricane is going to benefit an extra amount from Ardent, but it's still good on most champions. It's less good on champions like Jhin because he has really poor attack speed scaling. The attack speed does translate over into raw AD that he can use, but it's not at a very good rate. You lose efficiency off of it. And he doesn't use the on-hit very well because he doesn't get any items like Hurricane or Guinsoo's, and his attack speed in general is going to be pretty slow. So like Misfortune, Jhin, those type of champions aren't going to be great with Ardent Censer because they use their abilities more so than they auto-attack. So she's much better on champions that are going to get a lot of attack speed. Or Ardent Censer is much better on champs that get a lot of attack speed, but it's still pretty good on most people. It's just better on those types of champs. Or if you have a Master Yi or a Kindred or something else that's going to have a lot of benefit from attack speed. Now, Aerie, a couple of interactions here to be aware of. Aerie does trigger Ardent Censer on abilities that target champions, even if that ability does not heal them or shield them. So an example of this would be a Zilean E, which speeds people up, will put Aerie on them, and that will trigger Ardent Censer. So you can comfortably trigger Ardent on Zilean if you put E on them. So that's something to be aware of. Lulu W triggers Ardent Censer. Now her shield does too, but what you can do is, in some situations, put your W on an engager like a Hecarim. It'll give them Ardent Censer, and then you can shield your AD carry, and it'll give your AD carry Ardent Censer. So then you can get it on 2 people at once with Lulu if you do that. The same is true of Nami. You can put your E on somebody first. So put your E on your AD carry, which applies those on-hit attacks. That since it targets the AD carry, that will put Aerie on them. That will trigger Ardent Censer. And then you can press W on your front line that's taking damage and have it bounce around between your tanks or assassins, and it'll give all of them the Ardent Censer. So that's how you get this extra Ardent Censer on more targets, is you use your targeted ability first, and then you use your heal on a champion like Nami or Lulu. Seems like a small thing, but it does add up quite a bit in team fights. And then Morgana's Black Shield triggers it as well. Sometimes people ask about that. It's like, it's a shield, it triggers it. And there are other interactions with a lot of other champions, but those are very common ones that come up that you can do. Now, Sona's W triggers Ardent Censer on every single person that the W touches because it's going to give them a small shield. So you can comfortably get it on 5 people a lot if you're grouped up with Sona. So that's what makes Sona a really strong abuser of Ardent Censer. In fact, all of her auras also trigger Aerie. So even if you use your Q and someone touches your aura for the Q, it'll put Aerie on one of those people and give them Ardent Censer. So that's just an extra little buff for her. So she's insanely good with Ardent Censer. Locket and Redemption also trigger Ardent on everyone that gets shielded or healed. So if you drop a Redemption on 5 people on your team, all of them are going to get the Ardent Censer buff. Same thing with Locket. You shield everybody, everybody's getting the Ardent buff for 6 seconds. And then finally, one of the more nuanced interactions that a lot of people aren't aware of, Font of Life can actually trigger Ardent Censer as well. So this is a rune you can take in your secondary tree The resolve tree, most people don't get it. It's pretty trash on a lot of champions. But if you can take advantage of this interaction with Ardent Censer, it's possible. So this means that champions like Fiddlesticks can go Ardent Censer, because if you fear somebody, it's going to put the debuff on them. And then anyone that auto-attacks that person, if your AD carry auto-attacks the feared target, they get a heal from the Font of Life. That heal triggers Ardent Censer because it counts as a heal coming from you, not as a heal coming from the person who attacks it, if that makes sense. So it's not lifesteal for the person who's landing those attacks. It is a heal that comes from you. So it does trigger Ardent Censer. So candidates for this potentially might be Fiddlesticks. You could do it with Gragas. You could do it with Nautilus. Nautilus does have decent AP ratios. So you wouldn't rush this on Nautilus, but it's like a, fourth or fifth item if you're already pretty tanky. If you're not dying in fights and you have a Vayne on your team or something, you might consider picking it up. Or on Nunu, for example. If you're tanky enough, if you already have a lot of health, once again, fourth or fifth item, your team needs a bit more offense, and you have Font of Life, you can go Ardent Censer on Nunu as well. And there are some other interactions as well. You can go try it out, see what you think about it. There aren't a lot that are like really meta that you can do that with, but it is possible. It is on the table out there in some situations to use that interaction. Okay, but let's move on. We have a lot more items. So Ardent Censer, very powerful. On most enchanters, you do want to get this item somewhere in your first 3 items most of the time. Okay, Athene's Unholy Grail. This is another one that's very confusing for a lot of people, so let's go ahead and pull it up here really quickly. The basic gist of it before we look at it is if you assume that you're going to be able to put out about 300 damage before you shield anybody. So most shields in the game are going to be on like somewhere between an 8 to 10 second cooldown if you're thinking Janna, Karma, Lulu, a lot of those champs, then it's going to be on that kind of cooldown. Now, some champions have a lower cooldown, so Soraka has like a 2-second cooldown on her heal. Sona, with enough CDR, you're going to get around like 3 or 4 seconds on her W. But if you can do 300 damage before you cast your next shield, now that can be auto attacks, that can be spells, that can be AoE. There's no reduction for AoE. It's anything that can put out 300 pre-mitigation damage. So even if they have like 5,000 armor and they only take 1 damage from your auto attack and your Sona, the auto attack is still going to count towards the Athenes for its base damage pre-mitigation. So that means that if you would attack for 60, even if it gets reduced to 1, it's still going to count as 60 stacks on your Athenes, which I'll show you here in a second. But basically, if you do 300 per, or not 60 stacks, but the 60 will convert it, you'll get 35% of that 60. That applies to your stacks. So if you do 300 damage every time that you shield, you get plus 100 healing. If your shield is only worth 200, then that's the equivalent of having plus 50% healing and shielding. So it's not exactly the same stat as healing and shielding. It's not going to affect redemption. It's not going to affect locket. But it's going to affect most of your abilities that have that heal and shield. Okay? So that value then, if you have about plus 50% healing and shielding, it's about 1,750 gold value. And so that's where I get up to about 4,200 total gold value with everything added up. Okay? So let's look at how this item works. I pretty much just explained it, but basically it's 35% of your pre-mitigation damage. So once again, doesn't matter if it gets blocked by resistances. I think even something like Alistar's R, it would still count that, even though that's reducing the damage by a ton, or like Irelia's W, all of those things. I think it includes that as well, or Warwick's damage reduction or whatever. Just anytime you hit somebody before anything is reduced, it counts towards this, and it gives you these charges. And then whenever you cast any sort of heal or shield, then this counts. Airy counts. So if you're triggering Airy on people, and Airy, shields them for 60, that can use up to 60 blood charges to heal them. Okay? Redemption counts. Locket counts. Anything that applies a heal or a shield to somebody counts. Font of Life counts. Now, Font of Life is a really low number most of the time. That's only going to heal somebody, like, your 80 carry per auto attack is probably going to heal for like 15 to 20, but it would double because that heal comes from you, so they'd get an extra 15 to 20. So it does have some interactions with Font of Life. So that can be useful. you know, for distributing all that healing amongst a lot of your team. If you apply the Font of Life debuff to a tank or something and everyone's beating on it for like 10 seconds, they're going to be healing for quite a lot. But that's how it works. So I think the easiest way to think of this is it's a massive plus healing and shielding. And not everything's going to do a 200 heal and shield, right? So like Sona usually is only going to heal for like 115, I think. It heals 2 targets, but that's the best way to think of it, is like really modest scenarios, 300 damage, which is pretty easy to put out with some abilities and auto attacks every, 5 seconds or so, translates over to about plus 50% healing and shielding. So a couple of other things to note about this. Every time you get an additional 25% mana regen, you gain 5% efficiency on the item, so you gain 5 AP. So this is why I really like starting this item, because it has several really good things going for it. First of all, these are fantastic components. You get an Amp Tome in the laning phase. You get a Null Magic Mantle, which helps you out with a lot of other champs. Chalice of Harmony is great just for getting some extra regeneration during the laning phase. It's a really, really good bargain. So if we look at just Chalice of Harmony in general, it's already basically 117% efficient when you buy it, and then any additional mana regen that you have, like Frostfang, also turns into base health regen. So you get an extra 50% health regen. So this is really good in attrition lanes, like Sona on Soraka, Lulu on Sona, all that kind of stuff. This Chalice of Harmony gives you quite a bit of extra health regen in the laning phase. So that's very handy. So it has fantastic components, and then when you finish it, it's got magic resist, so it has a little bit of defense on it. It has a little bit of mana regen on it, and it has plus 50% healing and shielding effectively, if you want to think of it that way. So it's really, really valuable to complete this item. And once you start building your other items with enchanters, it starts stacking even more. So once you get your fairy charms and you're building an Ardent Censer, once you get your fairy charms and you're building into redemption, you're gaining more and more and more value. Each additional fairy charm is basically double value. You're getting 5 AP. AP is valued at 21.75 gold each. So you're getting about 106 gold efficiency out of that. On 105 fairy charm. It's very, very efficient to start with this item. If you get redemption after this plus Frostfang, it's a 90 AP item. 90 AP. That's nutty. On an item that's 2100 gold and basically gives you plus 50% healing and shielding. And it has some extra magic resist to help protect you against some assassins or like ZZ'rot brand, that type of stuff. It's crazy. It's an insanely good value. This, like, you should rush this on any champion that can use it. Like Sona, Nami, it's a little more dicey on Janna, but it still could be good. Soraka, Mikhail's sometimes can be good, but it's still going to be very, very good. And I think it's because a lot of people don't understand what this means. But basically, it's 35% spell vamp for your team pre-mitigation. So 35% of all damage that you deal from any sources, AoE, physical damage, magic damage, auto attacks, redemption damage, anything that does damage, ignite. Anything you can do that does damage is going to fuel this Athene's. So it's very, very powerful. They buffed it back in like 8.12 to give it 35% instead of 25% redemption. I think right now we are in the Athene's meta, and people just don't realize it. But what's in common with all three of these champions? Most of them get Athene's most of the time really early. So super powerful item. Plus healing and shielding and revitalize also apply to that healing. So it actually stacks multiplicatively with plus healing and shielding and revitalize rather than additively. So what that means is, let's say that you use 250 of these charges, right? Let's just say 100 just for an easy number. Let's say you use 100 charge. It's going to be 100 heal. Well, if you have an extra 15% plus healing and shielding, 5 from revitalize, and then maybe 10 from redemption, that's going to be 15% more healing. Right, so it's going to be 100, and then it's going to go up to 115. And then if you have, if they're below 40% health and you get that extra 10% off Revitalize, then whatever that number was, that 115 is going to get an extra 10% on that, right? So you're going to get an extra, 11 or 12 healing off of that. So it just has insane stacking. It's just like, it just stacks so crazy with everything that's going on. It's a super, super powerful item. Now, it doesn't have an AP ratio on it, but still, it's really, really good. Okay, and there's no CD. You can't mess this up. Your ally can't run out of it like they can with Redemption. You don't have to worry about trying to trigger it on specific people using its abilities. You don't have to worry, well, do I have enough auto attackers on my team? Because it benefits everybody. It benefits Jhin, benefits Morgana, benefits Syndra, benefits Akali. You know, like any champion in the game is going to like extra healing, whereas not all champions are going to benefit equally from Ardent Censer because they just may not auto attack that much. So this makes it the most well-rounded item in the game. So especially if your AD carry's feeding or they're underperforming, instead of Ardent Censer, you should highly consider picking up an Athene's. And I would pick it up early anyways. Okay, Redemption has really good value with Athene's, like we just talked about, because it gives 150% mana regen, which translates over into an extra 30 AP. So you get an extra 600-something gold value off of that right here that I mentioned. Now, this is going to be about 215%. You notice all of these enchanter items about 200% efficient, over 200, even in very moderate, like, balanced cases. And they go way higher in the imbalanced cases. So if you heal 2 allies at level 10... that's a 410 heal total, then it's 45% extra, because remember on this item, and a lot of people forget to read this, this is why it's one of the more confusing items, you get triple value out of this, 3 times your heal power. Okay, so the more plus healing and shielding you have, the stronger this is going to be. This was a nerf a long time ago. It used to have a much higher base heal, and then they changed it and said, no, you have to get a lot of plus healing and shielding to have this item scale. It's a lot weaker as a single item power spike. Some champions will still get it, you know, like Bard, Thresh, but that's because there just aren't great items on those champs, and so they just get something generic that's good at team fighting, like Redemption. But if you can actually get the extra healing and shielding. Now, it has 10 on it, and that includes this. So this number is multiplied by 1.3 anyways, so 30%. Why did I say 45? Oh, because you have 10% base, and that's going to be tripled to 1.3. But if you take Revitalize has 5% plus healing and shielding built in, so that's 15% tripled, 45%. So you multiply it times 1.45. You know, just a simple way to think of this is that's going to give you effectively like 595 heal on 2 targets. If you think of that as like HP that you're going to have, once again, it's not exactly HP. If you're Mundo and you get healed by this, it's not going to benefit your other abilities like normal HP would. But just for the sake of easy comparison, just call it like raw HP that they're going to have in this fight. And you're going to get 1581 gold value out of it. So 1581 plus 653 plus the normal efficiency of the item, just all the stats it has on it, gives you about 4,500 gold. This is only if you hit 2 allies, yourself and one other person. Surely you're going to stand in it because you know where it's going. If you ping it a lot, hopefully one other person will stand in it. But if you have 3 or 4 people in a team fight stand in this, or if you have more plus healing and shielding, if you have an Ardent Censer to go with this, or if somebody's lower, you know, if they're below 40% health, they're going to get an extra 10% off of this. With Revitalize. So this number can get really crazy really quickly. You can easily eclipse 300% efficiency if you're hitting multiple targets, especially later on in the game. Remember that it gives you more healing as the game goes on. So mine was just based on, what did I say, level 10? You know, if you get up to level 14, it's going to be even higher, right? You're getting an extra 70 heal if you get up to level 14. So that's like 30% more efficiency right there just for being a higher level. So, yeah, it's very, very good. So, most of the time, you don't want to rush this item just because at lower levels, it doesn't give you as much benefit and you don't have anything extra to stack with it. You know, you're not going to get the extra 30 AP off of Athene's, or if you want to go Ardent Censer earlier, you're not going to benefit from the plus 10% healing and shielding. So, it's a very good second or third item, but on most champions, I probably wouldn't rush it first unless you're going like a Redemption Locket build on like a Bard or a Thresh, just because all other items suck on them, or a lot of them do. So, most of the time with Enchanters, second or third item. It also does apply some semi-global pressure. Like I mentioned before, you can be bot lane, throw a Redemption in the mid lane, help turn that fight around. You know, you can throw it in the jungle, help turn that fight around. So there's a lot of different things you can do with that. Has a huge impact in team fights. Obviously, if one team has a Redemption and the other doesn't, and it's kind of a longer fight, a team with a Redemption is going to be very hard to deal with. It scales really hard with plus healing and shielding and Revitalize. Just talked about that. And it has a lot of mana regen, which is very good on champs that spam mana a lot, mostly like Sona. and then it also benefits Nami quite a bit as well. So you get the extra AP off the mana regen if you have Athenes, but that's also going to give you 300% mana regen with Frostfang plus Athenes plus Redemption. You're good to go. So you no longer need to get tier on Sona because of all the mana regen that this gives you. Okay, so very, very good interactions. Awesome, around the map. It can also damage opponents, does 10% of their max health true damage. That's like 200 true damage against a 2,000 health target. So that's really valuable too, but we didn't even include that in the calculations. So it's that good. It's very strong. Now, the thing about it is, though, you have to actually hit people with it. These items just work. You don't have to do anything special. Ardent Censer and Athenes, they just do their thing. But this one, you have to actually aim it carefully and ping it, let your team know, and try to get people to get in there. Now, this is obviously because it's an activatable. It's going to be very good with like Cosmic Insight, which reduces the cooldown. It was good with Ruby Sightstone before they removed that, but that's gone now. If you do take Ingenious Hunter for some reason, if you're going for like Redemption plus Mikhail's plus Locket build, then it would benefit from Ingenious Hunter as well. But that's kind of a rare rune these days. But Cosmic Insight, if you have it, you could give a little bit of extra consideration for Redemption. That's a really good rune anyways. Okay, other stuff to keep in mind here. All right, so Blade of the Ruined King. This is something that is really misunderstood by a lot of people. I think a lot of people just blindly get this because it has a lot more value in pro play than it does in solo queue most of the time, because it gets combined with things like Hurricane, most notably, which is really good in team fights, but really anemic in a lot of situations in just like one-on-one or two-on-two skirmishes. But the base item is pretty good. It's efficient. It's about 130%. Now, this one's hard to calculate as well because it's based on the enemy's health pool, and it's not total health, it's current health, and it has a 15 minimum. So it's a little awkward, but basically, like, a real simple way to sort of estimate this is if you say that, the average champion sort of in the mid-game is going to have about 1,500 health. Then on the way down, their average health, if you go from 100 to 0 with them, their average health is 750. So I just calculated it was 750. You get 8% of 750 per hit. Is going to give you 60 on-hit damage, and that's worth about 1,500 gold. So the item itself, with that in mind, and the active is a slightly modified Bilgewater. The Bilgewater active's worth 250 gold. On Bilgewater, this steals movement speed, so you move faster in addition to slowing them down. So, you're getting a little bit of extra value there, but just for simple math, I counted it as about 250, so that gives you about 130% gold efficiency. That's really efficient for a lot of items out there. Infinity Edge is going to be about 112% gold efficiency on single item. I think Essence Reaver is going to be something like 117% efficient. And it does, and this number is going to be slightly higher because when you get to 200 health and below, then this 15 on hit is going to be more valuable than what I calculated. So it's probably closer to like 140% efficient or something like that. But it's really, really good. So that's why a lot of people rush this. It scales really well with Guinsoo's, and it scales well with Hurricane, because each one of the Hurricane bolts applies Blade of the Ruined King. And every second hit on Guinsoo's will apply it twice. So very good with those items. Not as good with critical strike items, though, because it has no crit on it. So do not get this. If you're going to get Infinity Edge, most of the time, do not get Blade of the Ruined King with it. It's not going to be good because it doesn't have the crit, which is what you want with Infinity Edge. Also, it's not good with champions that have a lot of like AD abilities that do burst damage. So it would not be good on someone like Graves most of the time because he has really high AD ratios, and a lot of his damage is from abilities. So this has really low base AD on it. This is also why you don't get it on someone like Draven, because Draven has such huge scaling off of raw AD because of how his spinning axes scale on AD. He's basically like a burst ability champion. It's just his auto attacks are that ability every time with the spinning axes. So it has really low base AD. So you don't want to get this, on like Misfortune or Jhin or Draven or, like I said, Graves. Any of these other champions that have abilities that do a lot of damage, Xayah, you don't want it. But on champions that have really powerful on-hit interactions, if you're going to get Guinsoo's or if you're going to get Hurricane, then it's going to be a pretty good item. Okay, so like I said, every second hit of Guinsoo's is going to apply this twice. Hurricane applies it on each bolt. Ezreal's Q applies it, and Twitch's R applies it. So anything that says applies on-hit abilities additional times it's going to apply it because it's an on-hit ability. Okay. It also scales really well with armor penetration and percent damage. So if you can get anything that penetrates armor, because it's considered physical damage, then armor reduces that damage. So if you reduce the armor, then Blade of the Ruined King's going to do even more. So it combines really well with things like Black Cleaver, which reduces armor. Or if you end up getting like a Mortal Reminder or something like that, then it can be pretty good. Lethality, in theory, you don't usually see Lethality and Blade of the Ruined King together on most champions, but in theory, that would have at least some synergy together. Press the Attack, because it modifies all damage by 12%, including off of items. That can be pretty good as well. So the most common stuff that you'd see this with would be like Mortal Reminder, Black Cleaver, or Press the Attack. So like Lucian, for example, this is why he goes Blade of the Ruined King, he takes Press the Attack, and he has Black Cleaver, because you get triple scaling off of those items. I talk about that in my 80 carry tier list and explain the numbers on that, so be sure to check that out if you want more details about Lucian and his itemization, but that's the general gist of it. So it scales really poorly with crit and ability damage, but it's really good with on-hit interactions. Okay, Guinsoo's Rageblade. This one's super confusing. They've changed this item like 5 times in the last year. It's fairly efficient by itself. It's a huge stat stick with like a million different stats and itemization values on it, and it like has to stack up, and it scales over time, and it has on-hit damage, and it has like 3 different kinds of stuff on it. It's just a mess. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. They just want it to be viable on a lot of different champions, but it's just like, it's so goofy and so difficult to understand. Basically, why most people get it is this last sentence here. Every second basic attack will trigger on-hit abilities twice. So it triggers Blade of the Ruined King twice. It triggers Silver Bolts twice. It triggers Kai'Sa's passive twice. It triggers Kog'Maw's W twice. Anything that has these sort of on-hit abilities are going to get triggered twice. So the most common ones are Vayne, Yi, Kai'Sa, Kog'Maw, Varus. Nico. I need to put Nico in there because Nico's actually a pretty popular one right now. But it has to be stacked up. So in order to use this properly, you need to try to stack it up on a minion wave first, get it all the way stacked, or like on a jungle creep or something, get it all the way stacked, and then go fight, if possible. It's not always possible. But basically, if you're going to be laning a lot, or if you're going to be near minions a lot, then this can be really good. If you're going to be walking around just skirmishing like cold turkey out of nowhere, it's going to be pretty bad. So it does not do a lot of burst damage at all. So if you're going to be getting caught out by this Kha'Zix all the time and trying to 1v1 him in the jungle, as Vayne, good job, Roy. It's not going to do that well. But if you're trying to take down champions over time, right, if you're fighting proper team fights, then it can be really powerful, right, especially when you're taking down tanks over time. So if you're a champion that wants to do a lot of auto attacks, this can be pretty good. Now, there's no extra way to stack it up faster. Okay, it's only on an auto attack. So some people get confused about this. It's only on a basic attack. So Lucian does not stack this faster. His double shot does not trigger this faster. Ashe's, her Q, her little thing where she shoots a lot of stuff with her Q, that does not stack it faster. Master Yi's double strike actually does not stack it faster, which is kind of weird. Master Yi is sort of a special case. Master Yi's OP as hell with this item, but that doesn't stack it faster. Hurricane does not stack it faster. So each one of those Hurricane bolts does not stack it faster. Each bolt does apply the on-hit damage. So each bolt does the 15 damage, but it does not count towards the 6 stacks. So you have to auto-attack 6 times, basic attacks, no matter what, in order to get this thing stacked up, okay? But each bolt can apply the bonus on-hit damage, and each bolt does benefit from the armor penetration and the magic penetration. And then every second shot triggers it on your normal attack. So every second shot does not trigger an extra hit on your Hurricane bolts. Okay, so keep that in mind. Hurricane bolts do not stack it faster, and the extra damage does not apply, the extra on hit does not apply to the Hurricane bolts, I'm pretty sure. So you often see it with Hurricane, and you see it, with Guinsoo Hurricane combo, usually with Blade of the Ruined King, and they all do interact with each other, but they don't stack as insanely ridiculously as you might at first think. But they do work well together. It's just the Ginsoos and the Hurricane don't, play super well with each other. Okay. And then the double strike does not apply crit damage, so you don't crit twice. So if it's like your second attack and you're a Jinx with 50% attack rate and you get a crit on your second attack, it doesn't crit twice based on that, because the extra attack does not do any damage in and of itself. All it does is it simply applies on-hit effects and additional time. So that does not apply lifesteal twice because there's no damage on it, and it doesn't apply crit because there's no damage on it. Okay, so you don't get double lifesteal, you don't get double crit off of it. You do get double Blade the Ruined King, but that's because once again, it's an on-hit proc. Okay, and it does stack really well with on-hit ability. So Blade the Ruined King is the most famous one you see all the time. Wit's End, it does, the extra attack does stack. I believe the extra attack does stack Wit's End twice. I'm not 100% about that. We'll talk about Wit's End in a second. I couldn't find good info on that. But it definitely applies the 42 damage twice off of Wit's End. So it does benefit from that. And then Gnasher's Tooth also has an on-hit interaction with the AP, and it does apply that damage twice as well. So it plays very, very well with all of these items, but specifically Blade the Ruined King because this has a lot of attack speed on it, and it does the most on-hit damage in most scenarios. Wit's End also has a lot of attack speed and also does quite a lot of on-hit, but Blade is still what most people are going to get. It's just a little bit better, well-rounded item to get early, although Wits is very good later on in those types of builds. Okay, so Hurricane itself. Let's talk about Hurricane. So let's pull this up here. So Hurricane, how this works, every single auto attack shoots out these two bolts that I believe are the same attack range. I think they're the same range as your auto. They might only be 550 range, so I'm not sure like if you're Caitlyn attacking, if it hits at the maximum Caitlyn range or not. I can't remember that one. But it basically works like it looks like in this picture. You shoot, it hits a primary target, and there's a couple of bolts that go to secondary targets. Now, there's some special interactions with these bolts. Each one does 40% extra AD damage, so that's really nice. So basically, if you're around 3 people and you auto-attack, you're automatically doing 180% of your AD, which is basically like almost a free crit every single auto, and it can crit. So each one of those bolts can critically strike and does scale off of Infinity Edge, so it gets an extra 10% off of Infinity Edge as well. So that adds up, you know, that ends up being quite a bit of damage. I'm not sure if it adds all of that up here for you somewhere, but it ends up being like a ton of percentage damage on it. It's like 50%, so that would be, if it crits, it go to 50, so that'd be 100%. So it's like 400% or something damage on a crit if you hit somebody with all of these bolts. So really good, and it has those on-hit interactions that I mentioned before, right? It's got special interactions with Blade the Ruined King, Wit's End, and Gnasher's Tooth. Then there are certain champions that have special interactions with the on-hit as well. So like Twitch's Poison applies to everybody that gets hit. Kai'Sa's passive applies to everybody that gets hit with the bolts. So the ones that it does work with are Kai'Sa's passive, Twitch's passive, Callista, so she can lodge spears into multiple people with this. Varus can stack up Blight on multiple people with this, and Jinx rockets have a special interaction as well. So each one of those bolts off of this turns into a Jinx rocket and can AoE. So if we pull up, I don't know if I still have a Jinx page up here or not. Let me just grab Jinx real quick, and it'll tell you the numbers on it. I talk about these numbers in my 80 carry tier list video, but it's just like a ludicrous amount of damage. So if 3 people are standing clustered close together off of this with Hurricane, let's pull it up. Here you go. If 3 people are standing close together, then it is 308% AD on it. So critical strike against stacked enemies when you have Fishbones and Hurricane. So that's a really, really powerful interaction. So it doesn't seem like it'd work that way. It does, each one of those. And that can crit as well. Potential critical strike damage. So if you have Infinity Edge, it's going to be even higher. It's going to be around 350%. So those are all champions where they have special interactions. It does not work with on attack abilities. Okay, so it does not work with Vayne. Her silver bolts cannot apply to multiple people at the same time. It does not work with Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw's W can only hit one target. You cannot hit multiple people. You'll see people get Guinsoo's plus Hurricane. They're just getting the Hurricane because a lot of times he gets Blade the Ruined King also. So it applies the Blade the Ruined King extra damage. It applies the Guinsoo on hit damage, but it does not apply Kog'Maw's percentage-based health damage. Okay? Ash's Q, the bonus, like the little shards that fly off, does not do extra damage on the hurricane bolts. It does slow people with her passive Frost, but it does not do the extra damage. Draven's spinning axes do not work with this because those are on attack. They only hit a single target. You cannot do spinning axes on 3 people with this. TF, if you pull a gold card, you cannot gold card 3 people with this because that's an attack modifier on just 1 auto attack, okay? So it's very confusing. That's why it's on my confusing item list, but these are the most popular ones that it does work with. These are the ones that it does not work with. In general, it has to be on hit, okay? So you need to read that carefully. It's on hit, not on attack. Same thing with Guinsoo's. Guinsoo's doubles on hit effects, not on attack effects. Although there are some weird interactions with Guinsoo's, like Vayne is supposed to be on attack, and it applies to Guinsoo's. So every second shot of Vayne's bolts do apply the silver bolts because the Guinsoo's, but it doesn't apply with Hurricane. So there are some really weird like spaghetti code interactions here. But in general, that's how it's going to work. So Hurricane bolts do not stack Guinsoo's faster, just a reminder, but it does apply the Guinsoo's on hit damage per bolt, okay? This does apply critical strike. Each bolt can critically strike, and each bolt can lifesteal because it is physical damage. Anything that's physical damage, lifesteal applies to it. Okay, so that's Hurricane. So most notably, usually you want Hurricane on somebody who's going to get Blade of the Ruined King because that's a super powerful interaction, and oftentimes those type of champions are also going to want a Guinsoo somewhere in their kit because Hurricane plays extremely well with Guinsoo's also. So all 3 of these are usually like the on-hit trifecta that you'll get on many on-hit champions, right? So you get this a lot of times on Kog'Maw, Kai'Sa, Vayne, Varus. Anybody that has special on-hit interactions that wants a lot of attack speed, it's going to be good. But you wouldn't just randomly get a Guinsoo's, with your Tristana, like 4th or 5th item most of the time. It's not going to interact with Critical Strike very well. Okay, Black Cleaver, and we're almost at an hour, and we got a lot of items to go through, so we really got to crank it here. Black Cleaver, anytime you do physical damage, it applies, okay? So this is a special case from a lot of these other interactions. So there are some champions that can multi-hit people but do not apply on hit, but they would apply Black Cleaver. So the biggest examples of this are Lucian. Each one of his double shots applies Black Cleaver. Each one of his double shots also applies Blade of the Ruined King, but it does not double stack Guinsoo's. Okay, so in each one of those double shots, the second one does not apply Hurricane bolts, I don't think. So you don't get 2 bolts off of a double shot, I'm pretty sure. That's actually an interesting question. I'm sure that he would probably get Hurricane if it worked that way, so I don't think it works that way. Ash with Black Cleaver, each one of her little arrows off of her auto attack when she turns on her Q focus does apply Cleaver. So 1 auto attack with Ash with the Q fully stacks Cleaver, 24% armor shred. So this is something historically you got on Ash that was very good back when Black Cleaver used to have CDR on it and used to give a lot more AD. Back in the League of Cleaver, Ash was very meta and she was very strong, but they've nerfed Cleaver a lot so that now you're paying a huge premium for the HP on it and you don't get as much AD, and Ash scales so well with Critical Strike. You usually don't want this on Ash. So like you might see an Ash occasionally pick this up as like a 3rd or a 4th item maybe, but it does have a good interaction with her. It's just there are better options a lot of the time these days. Urgot, each one of his little shots when he walks around you, I forgot what it's called, Purge, each one of those shots does apply Black Cleaver, so you stack Cleaver super fast. That's why you get this on Urgot first item. Graves, usually you'll get Cleaver really early because his buckshot, remember it's pellets, kind of like in a real shotgun. It applies 4 stacks of Cleaver. If you are point blank and you hit him in the face, it's 4 stacks of Cleaver. So it will not apply Blade of the Ruined King 4 times on an auto attack, but it will apply Black Cleaver. Okay? And it lowers the armor on somebody, so that does apply to how abilities do damage. So like Blade of the Ruined King does additional damage because they have less armor, less of that damage is going to get mitigated. So it plays very, very well with Blade of the Ruined King. It plays very well with Hurricane because those Hurricane bolts are going to cleave everybody that gets bolted, right? So everybody that gets touched by those Hurricane bolts is going to get cleaved. So that's really, really strong as well. So if you have Cleaver plus something like Blade of the Ruined King or Hurricane, you're going to get a lot of value off of that. And the main thing to keep in mind here is that armor pin, the the 24% armor pin applies for the entire team. So if you, stack up this on that huge Cho'Gath, everybody's going to, ignore 25 or 24% of Cho'Gath's armor, right? So it's not just you as the bruiser or as the 80 carry or whatever. It's everybody that does physical damage is going to love you for this. So it's a huge, huge team buff for team fights. That's why you'll see a lot of team comps will include somebody who has a black cleaver in there somewhere, because that's so strong, whether it's Lucian or Urgot or Graves, or just somebody's going to get cleaver a lot of the time because it's just really, really powerful, particularly for taking down tanks. The cleave also applies to press the attack. So if you have press the attack, like a Lucian, for example, 12% extra damage, and then they're cleaved already, that 12% damage is going to do physical damage, and so it's going to do a little bit of extra off of that. Same thing with, like, if you take Comet or something like that and they're cleaved and you're doing physical damage, it's going to do more. Dark Harvest, I believe, does adaptive damage. It would do more as well. True damage does not get benefit from this. So remember, true damage is not physical damage. Okay, so your Vayne Silver Bolts, not going to get any benefit off of Cleaver. All right, your normal auto attacks as Vayne will, but the Silver Bolt, percentage max health damage will not, obviously. I just wanted to point that out because sometimes people get confused about that. Okay, Wit's End. So this is one that people have been sleeping on for a long time. This item is really underappreciated, and so is the next item, Death Stance, which we'll talk about here in a second. But I think Wit's End has a lot of interactions that are very, very powerful that people are not getting. It's 177% efficient once you get it fully stacked up. Right? So once we just start with it here, it starts off as whatever percent, 115% efficient at 0 stacks. That's already pretty good. Infinity Edge is only 112% efficient. Blade the Ruined King was what, like 130% efficient. So the fact this is 115 before you ever touch anybody is really nice. And then once you stack it up, once you get to the fully, the full 30 magic resist stack, then it ends up being 176% efficient. And it's even better than that because it's counting this as magic penetration, but it's the same thing as Cleaver, where it lowers the magic resist for everybody. So if 2 people are benefiting from this magic penetration, for example, like your mage is benefiting a lot from it as well. If you're Kai'Sa or something, you take this, or you're Nico, on-hit Nico bot lane, and you take this, and your mage benefits, it's like you're giving them 30 extra pin too. And magic pin is a very under-budget stat. It's super overpowered. This is why every single caster, in mid lane is going to rush Sork Boots. A lot of times they're going to get a mana item, they're going to get Sork Boots, and then historically they're going to get the Oblivion Orb, because flat pin is super, super strong on mages because they do so much upfront burst base damage in their abilities. So yeah, it goes up to 176% efficiency, not including the benefit that you give to your allies. So it's a very, very powerful item, particularly for these on-hit ability builds, because guess what? Hurricane, it applies the 42 bonus magic damage on hit. Guinsoo's, every time it double procs, it's going to apply it. Now, a weird interaction here that I'm not sure about, and I've tried to look this up and I couldn't find a straight answer, is it says basic attacks on hit grant this, extra resistance and all that stuff. Whereas the other ones, if we look at Guinsoo's, it just says basic attacks grant this, right? Basic attacks fire additional bolts. It doesn't say on hit, right? But this says on hit. So that leads me to believe, I didn't test this out. I should have tested this out, but I didn't think of it until I was basically ready to make the video, and I got to get out of here and go to dinner in a second. But I could test this out in the practice tool and maybe leave a comment down there. But I'm wondering if Hurricane would stack this up faster. I don't think Hurricane would do it per se, but I think Guinsoo's might. So if you came in and you were already fully stacked with Guinsoo's, then this would probably stack up even faster. Reduce the target's magic resist. Now the thing is, it needs to be on the same target. Well, now I'm wondering, can you apply this? Is it only on one target? Let me see. Or can you get multiple targets? Okay, yes. So it says this here. Magic resist can be stolen from multiple enemies at once, including minions, but the user can only gain a total of 30. Wow, so it's even stronger than I thought. So if you're in a team fight with Hurricane with this bad boy out and you're hitting 3 people, you can shred all of them. So you can take away, up to 30 magic resistance from like 3 people in a fight with this. That's nutty. That's insane. Like that, and everybody benefits. So everyone on your team is basically going to be doing 30 magic pen worth of extra damage to all 3 of those targets. That's even better than I thought. Now, as far as stacking it up, it doesn't say it here, but I think Guinsoo's double shots on Guinsoo's can stack it faster. So if Guinsoo's is stacked up and you start auto-attacking someone, then it would stack in, 4 hits or something? 1, 2, 2. Yeah, it would stack in 4 hits instead of 6 on a ranged champion. Yeah, very, very strong. So with Guinsoo's and Hurricane, it does work. I think Guinsoo's will stack it faster. I'm not sure about Hurricane. As we saw, you can apply it to multiple people at once. The entire team benefits from the magic pen, especially if you're hitting multiple targets with this. This is very efficient for on-hit builds because you want more attack speed. If you have Blatherin King plus Guinsoo's, you obviously want a lot more attack speed, but you don't get a lot of benefit out of Critical Strike because you're not going to have Infinity Edge. So that makes this very appealing because it gives you a lot of attack speed and it gives you defense. So if they have magic damage on their team, this is giving you a lot of defense and a ton of extra damage. So attack speed synergizes really well with Guinsoo's. You're going to trigger that faster. You're going to trigger Blatherin King faster. And you're going to get magic resist. And you're going to do 42 on-hit damage. And you're going to shred the magic resistances off of people. So this is really, really good, especially on champions that have magic damage in their kit. So like Kaisa with her passive, Kog'Maw with his W, Varus with his stuff, Nico with her W damage. If you have Nashor's Tooth, the damage off of that is magic damage. So that will help you out a little bit. So anyone that's going to be doing a lot of magic damage, this is going to help out. But you even see this sometimes on things like Vayne, right? Where it's like, well, she doesn't have any magic damage, but it's just because it does so much on-hit damage and it shreds for the rest of your team. That you occasionally see this on someone like Vayne. Now, not all the time. I've seen it. Not a lot of people. Looks like you're getting it. But I've seen it sometimes, but it's definitely becoming a staple on people like Nico for sure because she has the magic damage in there. I think more people are starting to pick this up. Yeah, there's one. So they got it instead of Hurricane on Nico. There's one. So people are getting it on Nico, and you're seeing it more and more on some other champions. And the problem is it competes with Hurricane in that slot, so you're almost always going to go Blatherin King and Guinsoo's on most of these types of on-hit champions, but then you have to decide, do I want to do Hurricane or do I want to do Wit's End? Hurricane does apply those bolts. It's probably stronger overall than Wit's End. If you get a 4th item, Wits would be good, but maybe if you're not team fighting or if they have a lot of AP or if you have a lot of AP, maybe it makes sense. But anyways, really strong item. Definitely take a look at it, particularly if you have AP damage in your kit, and that resistance would be very good. But most people are still going to get Hurricane a lot of the time, but I still think that Wit's End, particularly in those situations I described, could be really strong. Okay, Death's Dance. The major thing that I want to talk about here is it's an expensive item. It's $3,500. You don't want to get it early, but it's like a 3rd or a 4th item. If you want something that's defensive but also gives you a lot of AD, I think this could be a good choice. The main thing is they changed this a while back to where it also applies to true damage, and Lifesteal does not apply to true damage, okay? So if you're a champion that's doing a lot of true damage, if you're like a Vayne or a Fiora or a Camille or something like that, I think that Death's Dance could be a decent, top-end option because it applies that. Or if you do a lot of AoE damage or magic damage, so someone like Kaisa might also benefit off of this because she's doing a lot of magic damage. So it heals for physical, magic, and true damage, 15% healing. So that is less, it gets compared to Bloodthirster a lot. That is less healing than Bloodthirster, but it does have the CDR, which on casters, or champions that have a lot of damage on their abilities, like your Camille's, like your Fioras, like your Kaisas, that 10% CDR can definitely be relevant. They both have 80 attack damage, but especially whenever you're in a meta with enchanters right now, it pretty much gives you 30% delayed damage, so almost like an effective 30% extra health, but you take that damage over time. However, if you have a Sona sitting there healing you or a Soraka healing you, or if this is your second healing item, so if you go for something like a Blatherin King first, on Vayne, and then you pick this up as like a 3rd or 4th item, you have double healing, then you might be able to heal through all of that. right? If you have a Sona healing you, or a Nami, or a Soraka, or any of that kind of stuff, they might be able to heal you through before this damage comes through. So I think delaying the damage in a meta that's dominated by Enchanter supports and getting it on a build that's going to have double lifesteal can be very, very useful. It's going to be really hard to burst through you with this. And that's damage received as well. So this does still benefit from plus healing and shielding. Now, it does not block true damage. It says all physical and magic damage. This is not going to stop Cho from killing you in one chomp. But a lot of stuff it is going to prevent. So I think it's really undervalued, particularly on champions that do have true damage, that would like some extra life stealing as a third or fourth item. So I wouldn't get it all the time, but I think you could see it on someone like Vayne, Fiora, Kai'Sa. Those are ones that jump out immediately, but also you see it on some people are starting to do this like on-hit Akali build with like Trinity Force and Death's Dance kind of build. Because she does a lot of mixed damage, magic and physical, or Graves as well, because he does so much damage off of his abilities, and he's going to gain a lot from it. So, could be interesting. Titanic Hydra, most people know which items or like which champions this is good on, but a lot of people don't understand why it's good. The main thing that's important, it does build out of Tiamat, which is nice for wave clear early on. The empowered attack is an auto attack reset, so make sure you use it as such, which means you attack, you activate it, it does another attack immediately. That's very strong for champions that stack up to get special hits, like Camille, Kled, and Jax. But the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I saw it in my game, where Kled like one-shotted their whole team, was it applies empowerments. Anything that's empowered on that attack gets spread to everybody. So your next basic attack cleaves and does all of this extra damage. So if you're playing a champion that has a special empowerment, so like Camille, when she converts her attack to true damage on the second part of her Q, right, Rory? All, including this right here, this active, does true damage to everybody around you. So if you get in the middle of a fight and you have that Q stacked up and you use this Crescent, it's going to hit everyone around you for the 10% max damage, the 40 damage, all of the normal Camille damage. I don't know if it applies Trinity as well to everybody. I don't know if it applies on hits, but I know it applies like the true damage off of that does like AoE to everybody. And the same thing with Kled. I don't think I have Kled still pulled up here, but I'll pull him up real quick. I realize we're pretty much out of time. But Kled is one of the like more popular abusers of this, and I didn't really understand like how the hell did he do so much damage. And I went back and looked, but it's this fourth attack. Does all of this extra damage, 6.5% of the target's maximum health, all of this, and it cleaves and does it to everybody. So it's really, really strong. Like Jax as well as another one. Whenever he gets his empowered, this is why you see Titanic on Jax. Jax can build all sorts of crazy items and be effective, but this is historically why Titanic has been one of the more powerful items on Jax. Now you have to time it correctly. You have to know when your fourth attack's coming up on Kled and empower it. You have to know and plan around your Camille empowerment. So it does take a little bit of skill and timing, and you have to practice it to get used to it. Jax has another interaction, right? So this empowers his next attack to do this extra damage, and he has Grandmaster's Might, which your next attack does this extra damage. So if you time this, if it's like you hit him once, you hit him twice, and then the third attack is coming up, you can turn on your Titanic Hydra. Sorry, I was blanking out there. Turn on your Titanic Hydra and then empower it, and then it's going to do this damage plus this damage plus your Titanic damage to everybody in an area around you. So it's just like blow up the enemy team. So that's why it's really good. But you have to practice it, and it's on certain champions that have these kind of empowered auto attacks. So if you see a champion getting Titanic Hydra, there's a pretty good chance that it's because it has one of those interactions. So you want to look for it and make sure you're practicing it. ZZ'rot Portal, there's not a lot to say about this item anymore. It used to be really OP, has a nice mix of armor and magic resist. It has really poor stat budget, though, because it doesn't have CDR, it doesn't have HP, and it doesn't have mana on it. So it's just armor and magic resist, which makes it pretty anemic. Like, as a later game item, if you're a split pusher, maybe like a Singed or something, but it really doesn't synergize with most other abilities in the game. It is pretty efficient at 120%. It just doesn't play nice with other items right now. And they did nerf the monsters quite a bit. You have to put it very close to the tower. So in solo queue, you know, if the enemy team doesn't have a good split pusher and you're someone who doesn't take towers super quickly, so you're like a Singed or something, this can definitely help you add some extra pressure to the map. But it doesn't give you any extra like power for team fighting, and it doesn't give you any extra initiation. So that can make it a pretty weak item. It can add that extra macro pressure. So if you have like an Alistar and you don't need items with Alistar, you just start fights and you have Moby Boots, you want to go drop this in like a side lane really quickly and ping your team back, you know, drop it in bot lane before you go contest Baron, it can apply some extra map pressure. But it's not nearly as much as it used to. Back in like Season 6, this was my jam. I love this item in Season 6. It's part of the reason why I got to Diamond. But they nerfed it a lot because a lot of it was pro play and it was abused by champions like Singed. The balance team really doesn't like macro items. Like Banner of Command just got flat out removed from the game, and this one got nerfed in the dirt because it just can make non-interactive pro games potentially, where people are constantly it forces everybody to split push and not team fight to try to deal with these items. So, anyways, that's partially why it's not in a great state. So I wish they changed it around and just make it like a really good support item. But terrible for solo laners, like terrible for split pushers. Just like nerf the armor and the magic resist, but like make the monsters more impactful. But that's not how it is right now. Hey, thanks for the sub. I appreciate it. And finally, Frozen Heart is one that I want to mention. I think this item is actually really good right now in the right situations. I think a lot of people have forgotten about it. It was a staple for many, many years. You would get this on every support all the time. Just now it's getting outshined by other like newer items like Redemption, Athene's, Knight's Vow, that type of stuff. But back in the day, it was you basically get Bulwark, which is what Locket has transformed in today, to like this aura item, and then you'd get Frozen Heart pretty much on everybody. But they have nerfed it over time as well. So it's pretty cost efficient by itself. It's about 115% efficient, not including the cripple. And then the cripple applies to all attack speed, so it's better than flat negation. So it's better than just countering like a dagger. So minus 15% applies after everything has applied. So if someone has a ton of attack speed, let's say, and they have 2.0 attack speed, and you multiply that times 0.015, it's going to be, or 0.15, it's going to be 30. So it's going to negate 2 daggers worth if they have a 2.0 attack speed. So if they have like, 200% attack speed or something like that, then it's going to negate 2 daggers worth. So, early on in the game, if you get it, yeah, it's only going to negate about 1 dagger's worth. That's still 300 gold worth of value on everybody that you're close to. That's a lot. If you're like in a team fight, that's going to be 1,500 worth of extra gold value. It's like 50% extra efficiency on this. A little bit more than 50%. So it can really easily climb up into like the 170% efficiency range in a team fight. But, not everyone, of course, is going to care about attack speed that much. Syndra's not going to care if you slow her attack speed, but probably not that much. But it is very, very nice. So if they have things that need a lot of attack speed, if they have... Now, keep in mind, this does not work on Master Yi when he has his ultimate going. He's immune to all slows and all cripples. So it doesn't work on Yi, unfortunately, who's one of the big people you would really want this to work on. But it doesn't. But it does work very well against things like Vayne, works against Kindred, works against, even stuff like Nunu or Braum, or just all these things that, just want to walk up and auto-attack you a lot. It can be very effective. So... The problem is it does compete with Zeke's and Iceborne Gauntlet. It's a similar price point to those items. Zeke's is actually cheaper. That's why most people get Zeke's, and it just gives a lot more damage to your team, so you almost always want to go Zeke's first. And you don't need multiple like mana items on most supports because it's just overkill. A lot of tank supports don't require a lot of mana. So... maybe on someone like Taric you could get this. So the problem is it's just out-competed right now. Most people who would want this are either going to get Zeke's or Iceborne Gauntlet instead. But it is still a very efficient item. So if they have, 2 or 3 auto-attack reliant champions on the enemy team, and you're going to be team fighting a lot, and you're going to play a tank, maybe consider it, especially if you have extra mana scaling and extra armor scaling like Taric. It could be a pretty good option. So very niche, but... is undercover like pretty decent in some situations. Final honorable mentions, then we'll wrap it up here. Twin Shadows, I get asked about this a lot of support. You don't want to get this item. It's very cost inefficient. I think it's like, I didn't link it here, but it's something like 80% efficient or something. It's a cool ability. Like, it looks good. It's like, oh, it's got AP on it. It's got these ghosts you can scout with. But the problem is it's competing a lot of times with other items that are way more efficient than it is. Here we go. So it looks good, right? It's like, okay, 70 ability power, 10% CDR, flat move speed, got some ghosts. That's good, right? It's like, no, not really. It's only 86% efficient. And remember, when we're thinking about, okay, we're almost done. When we're thinking about Athene's, Redemption, Ardent Censer, all of those are over 200% efficient. So they're almost like 2.5 to 3 times more efficient than this. You might say, well, what does that mean? That means that, the difference, I don't know exact off the top of my head, but it's like somewhere between 5 to 8 kills worth of gold difference here. So it's really, really bad most of the time. Like, the only champion you might consider this on is someone like Fiddlesticks, maybe, because scouting is at a premium, because he really needs to figure out where people are. And slowing people down can be helpful, and he doesn't really need mana. He doesn't benefit from plus healing and shielding. He doesn't really need a lot of spell penetration, because he doesn't poke a lot. So, like, there are some champions where this can be good, but on most champions, most of the time, you don't want this. It's just not efficient enough. Last couple of items here. Shurelya's actually is efficient. Shurelya's is 115%, so it's way better than Twin Shadows. And being able to speed your team up, I think, is way more powerful than slowing them down with a delay with the ghosts. It's really good for initiating, like, crisply, like, right into a fight. So Shurelya's can be very good if you have things like an Olaf or a Malachi or a Darius or just something, just like a bunch of bruisers that just want to run in there and beat people down. That can be very good. Particularly if your AD carry's failing and you don't have a lot of good, like, uses for Ardent Censer on your team. There aren't a lot of other auto attackers. Maybe you could sneak in Shurelya's as, like, a third item or something instead, but the problem is it competes with the Ardent Censer, Athenes, and Redemption, which are all, as we've talked about, super powerful. But it could fit into some niche builds. Nashor's Tooth, very efficient, very strong. It's just a lot of champions aren't going to want it most of the time. They're just going to be better options, but it is a very powerful item that just gets outshined by the Guinsoo's Blade the Ruined King interaction. If they ever nerf Blade the Ruined King, you might see some of these champions like Kaisa, switching over, trying Nashor's Tooth. There might be a couple of other AP champs that try it. Obviously champions like Azir are going to like this, but it's kind of a weird thing where it's like it's people that want attack speed and that want AP and CDR. So it's kind of awkward, but it can be good in some very, very niche situations. I see a lot of people get Abyssal Mask. It's trash. It's not very good. It does give extra magic resistance, but it only works for like 350 range, so it's like almost melee range. So you have to be ultra close to people. You're probably only going to get it on one person, even as a tank in the middle of a team fight, because people are going to spread out. So Abyssal Mask is really overrated, I think, in a lot of situations. It was OP at one point, but it's not anymore. Spirit Visage, similarly, pretty good. It has 100 more HP than Adaptive Helm, but Adaptive Helm is so strong. Like 20% extra percent damage reduction, which I believe stacks additively, if I'm not mistaken. It might be multiplicatively, but I think it's additively with Magic Resist. It's so good against so many things out there. Like, it's great against Corki auto attacks. It's great against Ryze, Cassiopeia, Azir. Anything that's going to do like persistent magic damage over time, Adaptive Helm is going to be super strong. So if your champion does not have healing and shielding in their kit, get Adaptive Helm instead of Spirit Visage. I see so many people get Spirit Visage on, things that don't really heal that much. You see like I don't even know what it is. Like, trying to think of like a top, like an Ornn with a Spirit Visage or something. It's like he doesn't have any healing. Just get Adaptive Helm. So anyways, that's just to keep in mind. And then Liandry's is a super efficient and powerful AP item, but it doesn't have mana on it. It doesn't have CDR, and it's just really difficult to fit it into a lot of builds. But if they do ever nerf some of those items, or if they ever give it CDR, then it could be a really strong item again. Anyways, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Special thanks to Mitch again for the generous donation. If you enjoy this like in-depth, true content that's giving you real information out there, not just the clickbait, be sure to like and subscribe. It does help other people find it. If you would like a guide yourself, just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com. I'll research it, put a lot of effort into it, give you the best information that I can, help you understand and appreciate the game better, gain that elo. And otherwise, come by, check out the rest of the content on the channel, check out the stream starting most nights around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.